to the Simpleton Podcast, the most humble podcast in eternity. Welcome back to the podcast, Laura Hehman.
Thank you, Clark Massey. Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Beautiful. How was your Thanksgiving, Laura Hehman?
Great.
How's the Advent season treating you?
Good.
Very good. Wish the best
comments.
for you.
Yeah.
All right. On this episode, we have some listener feedback to go over. We also want to talk about kind of the core reason why we started the podcast and like what we're thinking now. So it's about paradigm shifts.
Do we have any sponsorships for today?
We are sponsoring the Catholic University of America. Would you like to plug our sponsor?
CUA is great.
There are a lot of CUA alumni associated with our podcast, including Laura and her husband.
Yes.
And my wife.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How about we start with listener feedback? Would you like to read the listener feedback we got?
All right. Here's a message from a listener. I have a general question for you. Why is it that a beautiful film moves me emotionally and inspires me to love more than I have ever been moved or inspired by liturgy? Why am I not engaging with liturgy in the same way? It must be the presentation and the immediacy of it. Something about our liturgy and religion feels distant at times. The story of this particular film essentially is a Christian story, so it's quite interesting and disturbing that a film is able to tell that story in a more compelling way than the church's own liturgy, at least to me. I suppose, according to the Catholic teaching, the purpose of the liturgy is not to inspire or move laity emotionally. It's to offer the Mass and worship to God. It's as the means by which the grace of God rebuilds the world. Pope Benedict says this anyways. But at the same time, all our clerics talk about it as if it's supposed to be this extremely moving and inspiring experience. And we flaunt stories about saints being moved to tears at the Eucharist or singing hymns. What's the disconnect? This was a great question.
How would you address this question, Laura?
So I think one thing he is right to point out, that if we think that being emotionally moved is the purpose of Mass, I don't think that is, and he points that out as well. I think of I was thinking that like a good analogy for the Mass is like family dinner, which in its like own way is kind of sacred, and it's like an ordinary thing that happens every day. And the family dinner can be absolutely beautiful and extravagant, or it could be, very simple. And that there's, but it's a can be a beautiful thing. And it's just an ordinary part of our lives, and maybe like one of the more beautiful part of our lives, even though there's not like an emotional, I don't leave every family dinner being like, and I just think it's but it is the thing that major sort of backbone of family togetherness and supporting our family. And, a lot of important things happen at family dinner, even if they're not tangible or easily perceived.
Or, yeah, if it's not like a moving dinner.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
I almost want to start with this idea of movies and then go on to like something about the way we're talking about Mass that troubles me. So movies are like this new invention that is an incredible immediacy, and it's only going to get more so. Like with VR and different types of, techniques, it's even going to be more like as if they're already in your head, you know? And to the point that like you can have like certain incredible scenes, like a Saving Private Ryan, where people are like, who were at D-Day
like
have to go to traumatized by it, right?
Yeah.
And I've also noticed in movies that like the world creation of the movie will sometimes suck me into something I don't even believe in. Mm-hmm. Like I'm getting fired up about some, cause that I don't even really believe in if I step back, but the movie's like drawn me in. There's like an almost an inappropriate intimacy there, you know? I'm not trying to condemn movies or anything totally, but you have to know that there's like this kind of like weird wall they've broken down that historically was never broken down. You know, like when you read scripture, it's at a different distance to you than watching a movie.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's like you kind of get like an affinity for a certain actor or a crush on a certain actor. And it's like you want to know all about the actor. And it's just like, this is weird, you know?
I also have this problem of like The Passion of Christ or any of these like Christian movies, because like what we know about Mary, what we know about Jesus is scripture. You know?
Yeah.
And whenever you're filling in all the details, like how they'd had small talk and how they carried themselves, you're kind of like really laying on a lot of information that's not there.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that's like, of course, can't be 100% accurate and might be totally off, you know? So I also am like suspicious of Christian movies that move me, because I would have to really be, you know, on board with that guy's, you know, interpretation. So I guess so. But I do love this analogy, because I have heard people discuss liturgy the way he's talking about people discussing liturgy. And I've been like, you're acting like I'm going to enjoy this more than watching Star Wars. And you don't have like laser special effects, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like when I think of the Mass, what troubles me is that I think fundamentally the Mass is about forming us and what God does for us and not what we do for God. Yeah. I know there's always like this like reciprocity thing happening.
Well, I think it's like in the, you know, the Eucharist, it's like, you know, we put this bread before you that we've made, and then God blesses it and gives it back to us, you know, like there is like there is a reciprocity, you know, that it's like we're putting this meager thing before you and no matter how fancy or how not the Mass is, it's still meager before the miracle that is going to happen at every Mass.
Right. The greatest part of the Mass is not done by vestments or any of the things that are in the Mass. Like there's like this theatrical component of the Mass. And I know people might hate that I called it that, but it can be very good. It's just like fundamentally, it's the miracle of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
You know, and that miracle happens despite the trappings around the accidentals of the Mass, in a sense, right? And
how wacky the priest is, how uncomfortable any of it is.
Right. And you and I were talking about like having a powerful experience at a really great liturgical Mass, like at a St. Peter's or something, you know? But then you can also have a very powerful experience in some desert cave with some persecuted Christians. But both of those are just like both, I don't know what you call like both great movies, right? But really you should be having a special experience even when it's lame.
I think it was like, I've been to more than one Mass at St. Peter's, and there was one in particular that my husband and I were just moved beyond moved by, and it was for an ordination, and it was so beautiful. Like we couldn't believe it. And it was like the human trappings were beautiful, but the thing, it was like, I feel like it was just a grace from God. It was a gift from God. Like all of it is just like a gift from God. And it's not like he took the offering of the preparations for that Mass and like blessed it, you know, and moved the people there. But yes, I agree with your point. And I think just tying that back to the family dinner, it's like you can, for special occasions, we'll go all out with the food, or maybe you go to a fancy restaurant or whatever your family does, you know, like you do more for the special occasion, you know, but it's like you can go to a fancy dinner. That is not a great dinner. It's like, there's another thing that is making the occasion, you know, and it's like you kind of put all your effort forward, but it's like the family and the companionship and all that makes it, you know. Right. I'm not saying it's a companionship at Mass. I'm saying that it's like the gift from God and God's presence among us. And
so the family dinner analogy is you could almost have a hot dog dinner where there wasn't even enough food and have it be very special. And you can have the best plated dinner with the fanciest china and have it not be that special.
Yeah.
And ultimately, this is just not at the core.
Right.
You know, it's important. Many things are important that also aren't the kernel, you know? So, and I have a lot of friends who are Protestants who came to Catholicism. And I think we see a lot of like non-believers come to Catholicism who are literally coming because of liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for it, you know? And I give these people like a pass because that's like the door they're walking in. And if they kind of like talk a little bit too much, like that's the focus, then it's like, okay, well, I'm not too concerned, but
I'm really sympathetic to that because I've been to some nice Protestant weddings. I've been to some weird Protestant weddings. And I think like it kind of makes me feel, you go to a Catholic wedding, it's a mass. It's like this incredible thing happened no matter what poetry Uncle so-and-so chose and what, you know, like, I don't know. Like, I think that there is something about the liturgy, but it's kind of like an ordinary thing about the liturgy. It's like, no matter what happens, if the priest gives a great homily or if it's in the most beautiful church or in a church basement or whatever, you know, wherever the liturgy takes place, this like extraordinary thing happens. And so I love that about the Catholic liturgy.
So I think it's a problem when we overstate it. Like when we think about this idea that the world will be saved by beauty, it's not the beauty of the liturgy that will save the world. Mm-hmm. It's the beauty of the sacrifice of Christ coming down to be with you that will save the world. And then the other thing that gets kind of funny is when we talk about it, like this is worthy worship and this is not worthy worship. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like they're both not worthy worship.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you're not capable of a truly worthy worship. Yeah. But you're still going to get this gift. So buckle up, you know? Yeah.
So anyway. I love, you know, like I think it's like you put your best foot forward, you know, as often as you can. You know, you don't try to make it more casual or something. I don't know, but yeah.
Well, all right. So back to the actual question.
Yeah.
Comparing liturgy to movies doesn't quite work. The movies are kind of almost inappropriate, the way they kind of get inside of us and can change us. And the liturgy doesn't even aspire to be that, I don't think. Yeah.
The movies are hyper palatable like Doritos are, though, too. It's like, you know.
They're the mix of the sugar, salt, and fat that you just crave.
They overwhelm the senses and it's not real.
Right.
Yeah.
And whereas the liturgy or the mass is real, even with bad liturgy, it's just the ultimate. It's more real than real. Yeah. You know, it's more real than our own reality. Yeah. And when people talk about liturgy as if it is going to be the saving, or if it should be even more interesting than, like it should be more enthralling than like the most hardcore action movie you've ever seen or something like that, that's just like not. Yeah. Not really what this is all about, or that's kind of off track too. Yeah. Yeah. But you shouldn't walk away from an action movie changed. but you know, he's saying that he walks away from a Christian movie quite moved, and that's good. Yeah. Yeah. I would say watch that movie every Sunday for the rest of your life and tell me if you're still feeling that way. But it's good question.
Well, I'm sorry. I want to say another thing about like the emotion of it, but I really like the sound of rain, and I find it really relaxing when it's like raining and I'm going to bed at night. If it's raining, I'll like crack the window open so I can have that nice, you know, sound. And I've recently, sometimes if I'm like trying to take a nap in the middle of the day or can't sleep, like I'll put, you know, rain sounds on my phone. And I had this experience recently where it was like raining outside and I wanted to fall asleep to this, but I couldn't turn up the volume to the outside. And it was like, I couldn't make the real thing real enough, you know, like the earbuds in my ear feel more proximal, more real than the actual real rain outside, you know? And I think, I don't know. I just think like in your faith, like the emotions during mass and during prayer. And I don't know, sometimes we can't turn the volume up and they feel distant, you know, and it's like, you know.
Yeah. You like the fake better than the real at some level. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I heard a crazy quote this week. I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's not mine. It's that people do not want to be informed. They want to feel informed. So like, if we do a good job on a podcast and give you a lot of information and you leave thinking, I don't know what the heck to do with that, you're informed. You just don't feel informed. But anyway, all right. To the next feedback we got. So we had someone for the very first time use our call-in line. Once again, the call-in line number is 913-390-3672. And this call-in had two issues that they raised. So they were very interested in the podcast we did on the wolves in sheep's clothing, talking about like when a religious order has a scandal and we don't actually get rid of the religious order. And sometimes we don't even remove the leader, you know? And this person had been in a parish that this scandal had happened in, one of the ones we even talked about. And the parishioners' knee-jerk reaction when the Vatican kind of kicked this guy out of the order, their knee-jerk reaction was to defend him, right? And as the listener said accurately, the Vatican is so slow to remove people that when they do finally remove people, it's almost too late, you know? And so it's not like you're an edge case when you get removed by the Vatican. You're one of the very, very few people who get removed by the Vatican. And his take was like, why is it that Catholics have this? It's disturbing that we as Catholics have this reaction of wanting to defend the pastor that's been outed, you know? And I think you and I have seen that in our own lives. Yeah.
He said, it's just, he asked, does Western Catholicism have a weird relationship with authority, or like a kind of an abusive relationship with authority that we want to defend?
I find that weird, though, because like the Vatican's an authority and your pastor's an authority. So it's like the weird relationship we have is that we chose the pastor above the Vatican, you know? So I didn't know if that argument made sense, but and I've seen this across the board, like with conservative people who've been removed and with liberals who've been removed. I think that they believe that one, the person who's being removed is more proximate to them than the Vatican, right? And two, I almost think they think it would mean something bad about them.
That's interesting.
Like you're removing my pastor who I chose, who I've been like, which really isn't necessarily a Catholic attitude, but like you've been going there, you've been like getting something out of this, and you remove the guy. Well, then you're saying that I was wrong to like have chosen this guy too, you know, which may or may not be true, you know. But I wonder if it's coming from that. I don't have a good answer to this.
The two reasons I came up with, I do think one has to do with authority, and I think that we've seen in some of these religious orders that authority is misused to manipulate, you know, and to create a, you know, deferential attitude to whatever, you know, Father says, or, and I think that my people, my fellow Latinos have kind of a history of I think it's in the culture, more deference to Father, you know, and giving the authority and whatever, you know, whether you live your life like that or not, you know, but it's very much like, oh, yes, Father, and not, you don't challenge, you know. So I think that is part of the answer. I thought when I was listening to the feedback, it made me think that maybe some of his, you know, fellow church people are just used to being in a posture of defense, you know, and I think like it's like you just feel like everything is against you, and there's like, you know, and I sympathize with that. But you're just like reacting because it's your normal posture, and it's like, well, yeah, and it could be coming from the government, or maybe you think the Vatican is a little bit corrupt, or you think whatever, or you don't like Pope Francis or whoever, and so you're just always in this like ready to spring.
Well, I think
from this posture.
There's a sense in which so many Catholics are so deep in the culture war that when they realize that the Vatican and even the Pope are kind of not very good at the culture war, they like kind of get pissed at the Vatican and the Pope. Yeah. And it's like, and so if their local pastor is telling them, you know, what they want to hear culturally, they kind of side with the pastor over the Vatican that seems kind of clueless about whatever the point we are in American politics and culture. So I don't know, like that could be it. I think this listener has not listened to our multi-part episode on the church sex abuse crisis, where we kind of go over the causes and like how it went down. But I watched a documentary on who was the guy with the BBC, Jimmy Savile or Savoy?
I don't even.
Well, he was he was like doing Top of the Pops for the BBC and was giving all this money to children's hospitals and was abusing all these kids.
Ew. Oh.
And the BBC aided and abetted him for decades, and only after his death did it finally come to justice. And when I was watching the documentary, one of the more interesting people they interviewed was a woman who worked at one of the hospitals that had received so much of the funding, and also a hospital where he'd abused people. And she just said, I just had a hard time believing it, just because of all the good it did. And then and she goes, and even now I just think, man, why'd you do it? Like now that and she just had this very sympathetic sympathy with this guy.
I feel like you see these things online that's like, am I overreacting? And then the story. And I love when people are like, you are underreacting, react more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be right that we're just trying to like crucify people and like put them all the way in hell for their crimes, which even if they are bad, really bad crimes. But like, it's also like she just was still sorting in herself the gravity of what had happened and hadn't figured it out yet. So I think that was just interesting. And I wonder if parishes are going through that same like grieving process. Yeah. So they just haven't sorted out the gravity of what happened. And 10 years from now, they'll go back and see. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. One more piece of feedback from that same call was we said that if you have a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you have someone who is literally victimizing people, they need removed, and the order and a religious order, which is a school of perfection, has been corrupted to an extent it needs shut. We also said that if you had been formated in that and had chosen not to leave, but said, hey, this is my school of perfection, I know we're abusing people, like literally, not criminally and everything, but this is my school of perfection. This is where I'm going to find Jesus. It's like that person also is not fit to lead.
Right.
Right. And then the question here was, does that also apply to John Paul II? Right. So I think what he's referring to is John Paul II and all the bishops, say prior to 2001, had problems in their diocese that they did not fully fix. Mm-hmm. Basically everyone, internationally, not just domestically. Right. And same with the Pope himself. Mm-hmm. Right. And Pope John Paul II particularly had a problem with the Legionnaires in that he did not fully come down on them and their founder in his lifetime. And I remember a priest, after John Paul II was dead, I was talking to him and he goes, this will be a major issue at his canonization. Mm-hmm. His relationship with the founder of the Legionnaires will be a major issue because that is so mishandled, And I think that's all correct. Yeah. And I do think St. John Paul II is a saint, and I think he was a great pope. I think all of these critiques are correct, though.
Yeah.
I think it'd almost be like you can be a good general and have corruption in the military or have a war crime committed by people in your military, even if you're a good general. I think that's kind of like what we have here. I also think it's very different when we talk about a religious order and the church itself.
Yeah.
Right. Like if the only seminary you can go to is a bad seminary, well, if you want to be a priest, you're still going to that seminary. In religious orders, it's a totally different ballgame. It's like, here's something the church needs right now. It's a religious order that will give you a special way towards Christian perfection and holiness. And if they're not doing it, they just need to be gone. Whereas the church itself, it always needs healed, always needs rejuvenated, and will always have some sin.
Yeah. And I think there's like a certain, like you can go into a diocesan seminary and sort of hold on to who you are. And there's a thing about going into religious order where you're kind of like handing it over. And I think I know multiple priests that went through weird diocesan seminary formation and came out and are great priests, but yeah, I think another thing with John Paul II is like It's like okay to be saddened by the point you bring up. It's like he did not react appropriately, or maybe did something wrong here. And I think it's okay to be saddened by that. I think you must call a wrong a wrong. I think there's also some level of we don't know what he knew or didn't know, and we don't totally know. And you kind of just have a hopeful view and a trusting God that he was using this, great shepherd of the church, for good, while, acknowledging what was wrong or not, ideal or whatever it was, and really saying the wrong thing is wrong. Versus the knee-jerk, reaction of explaining no, the reason is because of this, and he was really a holy man and he was misunderstood, or he didn't know XYZ, or, just explaining it away or defending it right away without, facing the potentially ugly thing. That's not the right posture. Yeah.
So in summary, the listener's kind of saying an unhealthy relationship with authority, but another word for that in Catholicism is clericalism.
Yeah.
So a clericalism or an unhealthy attitude towards authority would be knee-jerk defensive. I'm defending this person, even if it's JP2, right? Yeah. A healthy view of authority would be really hard job, made mistakes.
Yeah. I
still judge that this was a good president if they reformed just a couple of the bureaucracies.
Yeah.
Would be a good president, even if they allowed many other bureaucracies to continue on in a bad way.
Yeah.
It's just this can do what you can do type thing.
Yeah. And you can do this and lament a mistake at the same time,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think I think this is one of the benefits of kind of getting older. If you end up with real authority and managing things, you're just going to have problems that you don't fix because you can't, and you have to prioritize which problems you're going to fix. And with power should come a lot of responsibility, or with authority should come a lot of responsibility, and it'll never be perfect, I guess. All right. One of our Louisiana listeners sent some Louisiana made molasses.
What brand was it?
Oh,
Steen's?
It was Steen's. It was Steen's. Yeah. Have you had Steen's?
Yes.
Was it good?
I don't care for molasses.
Why do we associate molasses with Louisiana? Because I also associate it with Arctic cold.
I tried molasses in Georgia, but from Louisiana people, that were living in Georgia, and they gave me a bottle of Steen's, and it wallowed in our pantry for many years.
All right. Yeah. I now have a bottle of Steen's a jar of Steen's in my pantry. Yeah. So very thankful for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a while before I try it, though. Probably after. It'll be a Christmas type thing. So, all right. The main thing we wanted to talk about before we had to do all the listener feedback stuff was the reason why I'm interested in this podcast when we first started wasn't some, hey, let's build up, it was a pretty basic reason. It was I've been always very interested in paradigm shifts, not just the minor ones where there's some industry that got disrupted or something, but literal ways that people reorient towards their reality, and I felt like I was in the midst of one, and our society and church was in the midst of one, starting a little bit before our podcast started.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think we are, and I think we're still coming to terms with it, but we've come a long way with that, right? And I think trying to get a handle on it is what I'm interested in. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I felt like the podcast was a way we could all kind of hold hands and do it.
Well, I think that's important, because I think part of the paradigm shift, or I think part of what you were feeling is sort of disruption in what we understood to be true, or who could we trust, or were media voices reliable, or whatever. And I think that there were a lot of voices that would make you feel alone as a Catholic were dominating the space.
And a lot of the Catholic voices had an edge that didn't feel joyful or hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like a situation I was in recently where like there's a group of people, something disturbing happens, and then everyone just kind of restarts the conversation like it never happened. Like we're all just kind of like acting like it didn't happen in order not to ruin the moment or something. And it's like, is this really the right way to do this? I don't know. It's awkward because it's made everyone doubt whether or not it really happened because we all just as a group ignored it.
Yeah.
And we've had this kind of like weird abusive relationship with our own information sources and media where like we're kind of getting gaslit. Like an example would be like Trump's victory is kind of interesting. Anyone with decent polling data would have known that was going to happen the day before it happened, and yet we as a nation didn't know that not a single swing state was going to go the other way. Like it wasn't very close, right? It was well within the realm of being predicted by polls, right? Unless polling has just gone through the tubes, which is possible, I guess. But it just seems like, why was that information kind of felt like it was being withheld? Or was it? Do you have a thought on that?
Well, about that specifically, there's this French man who made like millions and millions and millions of dollars betting that Trump was going to win big. And his the whole thing he based it on was what he called the shy voter effect. That we know polls are unreliable because the shy voters are not going to speak to pollsters or afraid to speak to pollsters but and the polls he used were polls where people were asked who they were voting for and who they thought their neighbors were voting for, which showed Trump winning in a big way. But anyway.
Yeah, I just don't know if I buy it because it's like in 2016, the shy voter effect definitely was in effect. And now people are less shy. And anyway, the whole point here being that sometimes you have to pinch yourself or like hold hands to make sure that we're all being sane here.
Well, I think, sorry. I thought I kind of lost the thread because I thought you were asking specifically about that. But I think part of the thing is like, it's like, we know this one poll is unreliable, but we all pretended it was. And the one man that didn't pretend it was reliable cashed in big,
Right.
Yeah.
Wait. Let's talk about ways our minds have changed and compare that to maybe what's happened in the nation. Because I think Catholics might be thinking differently than the nation is thinking. Mm-hmm. I have been very formed personally by watching what's been going on in China for the last 6-7 years. China has been like really going downhill for 6 or 7 years. And you can see that in the number of like expats who live there has gone dramatically down. The number of tourists who go to China has gone dramatically down. And what happened was essentially there was this like cooperation between the public and private sector in China where there was like some corruption, maybe 10% of your profits have to go to the Communist Party, right? But there was this moment where the party shifted and was like, we're calling up businesses and being like, can we have ownership of half the company? That's what we require of you now. So instead of taking the 10% that had fueled this enormous economic growth and built the biggest manufacturing base in the world and rescued all these people from abject poverty, which is enriching the Communist Party and also enriching everyone in China, they instead tried to really grab, right? And it ended up kind of killing the golden goose in China. Like they cut open the golden goose to see what was producing the golden eggs, and they killed it, And at the same time, China got very draconian, and to the point that people who were protesting were just being disappeared to never be seen again. We don't know if they're alive. We don't know if they're dead. This is not dozens of people. This is thousands and maybe even up to like 6-figure number of people have been disappeared by China. That's not even to mention the minorities who've been put in concentration camps like the Uyghurs. Mm-hmm. So all this has been happening to the point that like the last big protest in China was called the white paper protest because people knew they don't even sell you bolts of fabric in China because they're afraid you're going to make bolts of fabric are controlled substances. Wow. Like you have to, they take all your info if you're buying a bolt of fabric in case you make a banner.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask.
Right.
Okay.
So the last protest that was big was called the white paper protest, where they just took 8.5, 11 sheets of paper and waved it over their head with nothing on it. So you kind of couldn't claim
Oh, wow.
They actually had a political message. It was just like, we're unhappy. Wow. We're waving white sheets of paper.
Yeah.
And those people were disappeared.
Wow.
So China is just in kind of a tough spot. They're still big. They still have the biggest industrial base and all that, but they've just been going downhill, And what really struck me about that was I didn't think they'd do that. I didn't see why they would choose power over wealth. Like why they would, once they realized they were destroying their economy, why did they keep going?
Yeah.
Like, why didn't they just say, hey, look, it's going to be good for everyone if we grow this economy. We're still in power. We're not really threatened our power. Instead, they wanted to grab power more tightly, even if it meant less wealth for everyone. And it just kind of struck me that as like a less, like part of the reason why you look at politics as a Christian is the same reason why the Vatican wrote the social doctrine. They didn't write the social doctrine because they're good at economics or because they're good at politics. They wrote the social doctrine because they believe they know the heart of man and what is good for man.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this was like information to me about the heart of man that the secular world, at least the Chinese secular world, could choose power over wealth.
Yeah.
Power over prosperity. Right. That felt dark to me. I was hoping that they were at least greedy enough to not be so power hungry.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of seeing that some of that was happening under Biden, but even maybe in a more dark way. The stuff that's coming out now is like people from the government having meetings with venture capitalists saying there will only be 3 AI companies. You might as well not fund more. Mm-hmm. Right. And if you've also known the incredible drop off in cryptocurrency startups and blockchain startups during the Biden administration, all of that was kind of like and also like the integration of the Biden administration with the social media platforms through the Twitter files. Yeah. You see all that, and it's happened in all the social media platforms. They actually were squelching growth. Like, who would say there should only be 3 major AI platforms? I mean, you could be robbing us of 1 or 2 or 3% of economic growth by doing that. You could be robbing tons of families of great incomes and real economic growth, not like building a bomb that you're going to go blow up someone's town with, but like the economic growth where you like have something the whole world wants and you're creating some value, And what's also interesting there is I don't think the U.S. government's middle management or deep state or whatever you want to call it, I don't think they get bribed. They did it in order to exert power, to like when you only have 3 AIs, you can manage them and control them better than if you have many.
Yeah.
And the same was happening in banking. Most people wouldn't know this, but what the U.S. has been famous for at least 100 years is the high number of banks we have. Meaning like our banks are in general way smaller than other nations' banks. We just have a lot of them, a lot of local banks, right? And we have a lot of bank failures and a lot of bank startups because of that. Well, bank startups have dried up because they don't want a lot of banks. Yeah. They want Bank of America and Chase and JP Morgan because you could just control them better.
Yeah.
And guess what? The Bank of America it's good for them too. They get protection, but they also do some favors, And all of this is choosing power over prosperity in a way that shifted my understanding, I guess, of politics and humans,
It's like kind of obvious to see like money talks or whatever. Because there's a difference between an individual getting rich and like the community getting rich. Right. But I think fundamentally, I thought people, for the most part, do have the common good in mind, even if at some level it's a misunderstood common good or and I don't feel convinced of that like I used to. So that's a big shift in my I'll show you a real way this naivety affected me was Simple House had a mission in Nicaragua. And when you visit a place like that, you're like, wow, there's no middle class. And there's also like no way for these people in the lower class to feel like agency and that they can kind of get up and get past, Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that. And like while talking to Mark, who ran our mission, I'm like, hey, I feel like there needs to be an economic component of this. And we need to help these people like kind of get some agency and like
succeed, develop, essentially, which by Pope Benedict XVI, he said development is the primordial human vocation. He didn't mean economic development. He just meant becoming more, improving the situation, improving the community, improving this, right? And I thought in my mind, the oligarchy, like the rich of this country, of course want this. Why would you want to be the only rich person in an otherwise poor country? Now I don't know that that's true. Now I'm like, oh, well, I got shook. Maybe they do want to be the only rich people and have everyone else be very poor. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I would just think it'd be much more enjoyable to be a big middle class company with a few still rich people, But so coming from this, I think that a lot of the energy in the Trump campaign came out of this. I think why Elon Musk got so involved in stuff is because of some of the economic things I said, and I'm now hearing what's interesting about this, like Trump kind of like team that's getting ready to take over is 10 years ago, they were all Democrats.
Yeah.
Including like 12 years ago, like Trump was a Democrat, the only person who wasn't an old Democrat's like J.D. Vance, and he's too young to have needed to switch parties.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. And the way they're talking is they're talking like we're coming out of a decade of confusion and mind virus or bad or whatever. Like we just need to get the woke out. We need to get the, this bad influence out. We need to deregulate the bad regulations we put in, and then maybe start balancing the budget. Then we're cool. So they're really not going forward. They're just trying to restore that which was.
And that which was brought us to that which is. But yeah.
Profoundly put. I also have to say that which was objectively better than that which is.
Yeah.
So I like what they're doing, but I'm more shook. Like I am more deeply, I don't feel like going back 15 years in America solves much. Because I've had a bigger paradigm shift than this,
Yeah.
The paradigm shift that I'm having, which I think I'm now getting made fun of for talking about too much, is this idea of the secular has just changed. And I think where we're going is not Benedict option, but I think we're going like early church. So Benedict option would be like almost like in my mind, like a Catholic Amish option, but like early church, where in the early church world, which mostly my knowledge of just comes from the epistles in the New Testament, there was a secular world. There was this Roman Empire that had like ideas of virtue, had Greek philosophy, had, this like, they weren't necessarily devout,
pagans.
Yeah, they weren't devout pagans, particularly the leaders. Some were devout pagans.
Polytheists.
There certainly were devout pagans, but they weren't devout polytheists. A lot of them were fairly secular, philosophical people. And then there were these Christians. And these Christians did not view their job as like making peace with secularism or even enlightening secularism.
Yeah.
I think they saw their job, which I think I unfortunately kind of view as my job, is help enlighten secularism a little bit, make it better and win them over to us. I think these Christians saw it as like our minds have been reborn. We are different people now. We are walking separately here. And we need to help you go through a transformation, like beyond a paradigm shift and beyond an enlightenment, a spiritual and mental transformation that will revalue your values. And the last shall be first and the first shall be last. But more than that, just love, And I think that was their orientation towards the world they were in. And that goes on and on and on, right? And then we have Constantine, where Christianity becomes the religion of the realm. Then we have the Old Middle Ages, and we have Protestantism. And then after some religious wars where Christians kill Christians, we kind of create secularism again, right? And we've talked about this on the podcast, but the idea there would be, we just need a place where we're not going to argue about the Pope or the Eucharist or whatever the issue is, or faith versus works. We're just going to lay down those for a second and talk about tax policy. And we'll put God on the currency, and we'll do all these things that show that we basically are very unified. Now, 95% of our beliefs on the world but we need a place where we can like sort out our little political issues without letting our religious conflict
for logistical functioning that helps us all.
And it worked. Right. And it worked in a way that created the Industrial Revolution in a sense, with these like Enlightenment values and property rights and things like that. And the Industrial Revolution creates the population explosion that we have now, which is a good thing. I know that's usually a pejorative, but like 8 billion people is 8 billion souls, right? God praise, right? And now that secularism that was this like truce space, this like discussion area for spiritual people to work out some problems, has actually become I don't know what you call it, like a spiritual space or a philosophical space of itself, a materialism type philosophy, or really it's a nothing, unfortunately, because there's nothing in it that really gives meaning and purpose. There's just a bunch of like shell games on meaning and purpose happening within that space. And so when secularism was that initial idea, as I described it, me as a Catholic goes there, meets my Protestant brother, assumes that you are not trying to kill my family, assumes that you want the best for our children and want the best for our society. Now let's work together and come up with something. And if I have something in my Catholicism that is important to this, I'll share it. But we are here trying to work together, you know? But when you're dealing with a group of people that it's no longer a space anymore, it's actually a thing where people can become secular, you're actually dealing with something that's that hates you.
It's hostile. Yeah.
It's hostile. The nothingness is hostile to the meaning and purpose, right? And it's dishonest, and it leads to things like school shooters and nihilism, because once you have no meaning and purpose, you can go at war to the whole darn universe, you know? And it also is a space of weakness where things like that are just mind viruses like woke can just like prairie fire the whole space, you know, or communism weird ideologies can just like, you know, take off and run, you know, and in the way they don't in like a religious culture that's not even Catholic, like a Muslim nation or a Hindu nation or whatever, you know. So it's just like my orientation towards that space is very different. And I feel a little bit stupid. As a result of like realizing it needs to be different. But I'm also not so sure that attitude I had wasn't correct, say in the 80s or something like that, you know. I don't know that anyone understood what I just said, but that's right.
I think probably, but I do feel like there's I'm like a very open person with a lot of people, and I think like it's like we are following the way, and I think in a lot of my life I've been like, come on, jump on the way, let's go, you know. And it's like, but the way is like narrow and it's difficult and it's hard, and and it makes demands on you, you know. And I don't know, you say, you know, it's like, what was it a mistake to have a different attitude in the 90s or, you know, whenever, and I don't know. And maybe there's kind of like, we all have a different way of being on the way, and those are important, that we all have a different sort of, but I do think I don't know, can you make it too easy to follow the way in a way that you jump off, or you're not really getting people on it because you don't understand what it is, or I don't know. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. And there's kind of like an obvious compromise here that I don't think people should label you or I with. So the obvious compromise is done by Pope Benedict had this analogy. I try to never say where I get stuff necessarily, but my wife told me this. But it's this idea that you have this hunk of gold and you keep making trades for something that's more, you know, more mainstream or whatever. And by the end, you're holding a lump of coal and you throw it away because it doesn't matter. Right. So a lot of people have done that kind of with their faith life. Right. Yeah. But there's also people who really realized it was gold, who loved it, who don't want to let go of it, but kept trying to like sell people that they needed to go get their lump of gold through a very soft sell and through like I'm sure that you mean the best type idea. Yeah. Right? Like if you're meeting with like, it's like a certain like realpolitik in all of this, you know, where it's like, don't assume people mean the best. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to assume people mean the best. Some do.
Yeah.
Some may. Some could. But it's certainly not I don't think it's a default. I don't think it makes sense as a default.
Yeah.
And what's the take home of that? It means like I wanted truth. I found Christianity partly by reading and engaging some ideas and just by grace and by some key people, right? Some people are like that, right? And they need you to keep that attitude so that you are available to them as a pathway, right? As they seek truth and God and faith, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of other people who are going to be really great Christians, but kind of honestly aren't seeking like that. Like I think in Protestant world, they call those people seekers or searchers. And like there's another type of person that, you know, is going to be a great Catholic, but also weirdly enough, might have been a great Hindu if they'd been born Hindu, you know, or like they kind of like need more structural support and less like, hey, I read a great book. Let me go on a quest.
Yeah.
And for those people, and what disturbs me as a missionary, or rather it's reoriented me, I think I've always been worried about this. You and I have talked about this idea of the seekers and then other people a lot over, I think we've had these discussions more than decades ago, you know, but like the problem there is that like a Catholic school has got to help those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And your parish life has to help those people who need that, like they need God in the water.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And our parishes have to more and more be separate from society in a sense. And our Catholic schools can't be like, okay, well, we're a Catholic school and we're welcoming a lot of nihilists in because we're an education for everyone. You can't welcome a lot of nihilists in or you're going to lose God in the water.
Yeah.
You can't compromise with nihilism.
You know, maybe there's people that like grew up Catholic and haven't stayed Catholic because of great conviction. I'm like, even hate saying this because I don't know. It appears to me that it maybe was more of a cultural factor in their life. And to me, I'm like, I want to keep all those people in the fold. Like, right. I want them at church, you know, and however often they come, and I'm happy to see them there. And I think sometimes, like, you know, Pope Benedict in this, you know, one of these books that was published by that reporter that interviewed him, like Salt of the Earth and the other one, Light of the World. He predicted that we were going to have like a kind of smaller, more intense church in the future because it was just going to be like harder to choose that you were Catholic. And I, you know, yeah, but I think that it's like maybe where the Benedict option might err is like in wanting to force that or something, you know, I don't know. And it's like no, let's keep let's keep everyone in the fold and let's bring them in deeper. But I feel like I can't even verbalize really what my sort of struggle is, but I don't want to force people out. I think I had a false worldview, maybe thinking that like, come on, jump on the train. It's all groovy here. It was a wrong understanding of like the way, which is narrow and hard and life-giving and beautiful and all these things.
I think that's right. There's sometimes this energy in this separatism that you want to winnow the church. You want to like sort the wheat and the chaff. And it's like, no, right. And not only that, our church is not just for seekers. You know, like as a missionary, you're not just looking for these intellectually awake people like a J.D. Vance who can have this amazing conversion. You're actually looking for everyone, even the ones who just need some encouragement and some context, you know, to be more faithful. And we need to make it we have to be missionaries to them too. And
it's sometimes those people end up being really valuable people
saints
in your parish. They can become priests. And it's like the intellectual person might actually be a kind of difficult parishioner, you know?
And we see this at Simple House that we'll have missionaries show up and it'll be like, we'll talk about conversion stories and we'll have an incredible conversion story, right? The next newsletter for Simple House will have an incredible conversion story. But then we'll also have someone who's like, I don't have a conversion story.
Yeah.
And they're really great.
Yeah.
And they're really like, you could tell they're really with God and they're really great, but they just don't really have a conversion story.
Yeah.
And you're just like, yeah, praise God.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Capping this off, I am feeling myself having shifted. I'm interested to see the way the world shifted and how this whole Trump thing happened. But at the same time, I feel it like as inadequate because it's somehow not really getting the problem that struck me. Not that it should, because it's not like they're a bunch of Catholics, but like I have a problem that's striking me that makes me view the world differently now, you know? And I don't think I'm alone because I'm seeing parishes behave differently in this new world in a better way, more a city on the hill way, you know, while still in society, you know? And I think there's even more to come. Oof, I kind of wish there wasn't more to come, but like, I think that there's more to come. I think we're still waiting to see how it all plays out. I'm curious about a few other things that maybe are worthy of their own podcast. But you know how when science became more popular, somehow it also created room for people to just not believe in God, even though none of that makes sense. Like science grew up within the Christian nations. You know what I mean? You could almost give credit to Christianity for science, you know, but still somehow it changed people's perspective. Like when they realized that the earth rotates around the sun and not the sun, the earth, did it like do a mind paradigm mess with people and make God not seem as credible? Yeah. You know? I think there's stuff like that coming down the pipe.
Because I was trying to think about this, because I think when we started recording the podcast, it was like, there's something is shifting. And I think, who knows? I kind of think we reached an inflection point, you know, and it's like, and there were a lot of, and now it's going to be a long time of playing out, you know, but it's like, you know, we knew technology was becoming a bigger part of our lives, but now we know it's like changing the very way we think and interact. And, you know, there's like a more like we know it's here, the fundamental relationship to your phone. I feel like those things were kind of like a future thing we thought about, you know, and now we know it's here, it's happening, it's unfolding.
And it will either help or hurt people finding God. Yeah. You know, and I think that's, there's a couple things like that maybe we will save for a future episode. I actually think one is historical. I think we're going to start believing that whether or not things are true and whether or not they're massively believed are kind of separate subjects. But like, I think it's possible, and I think it's probable we'll start mass believing that there were quite developed civilizations, like as developed as, say, ancient Egypt, over 10,000 years ago. You know, and that's kind of weird because it's going to make people reorient in time, like Christ's coming and what religion means when there were so many thousands of years, even pre-Moses. Yeah. You know, I'm a little bit worried about that a little bit. I think that could shake people the same way, like we had a podcast one time about aliens. Yeah. It doesn't even matter if aliens are real. If we all start believing there's a lot of intelligent life out there, how does that change your religion? You know, it will change people's religion. Even if you have a solution, I don't think the wide majority of people will. So it's like, prepare. You know? Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to say something deep and encouraging, but you feel like things are changing or we're going into unknown future, which we actually are, just no matter what, going into an unknown future. There is like still the God's will for our lives remains the same, you know.
Well, I'll say something else that's encouraging. Like, you are more important than you think you are. You know, like anyone who has a feeling of God and a relationship with God and knows that what that divine love is, has an incredible role. You know, and it's more important than I thought it. Like in the paradigm shift I just described, it's more important now. You know, being the salt of the earth is more clear to me in this new world where Christendom is, the trappings of Christendom have fully fallen away. Go be the salt of the earth. Like, you have a nice little rebellious mission in front of you. You're all like the special forces now. Let's go.
Yeah,
you know?
I think I would have phrased it differently, but it's like no matter what, God's will is unfolding
Right. But it's not just like happening to you. It's like, go take this love and go, go take this Eucharist and spread, and it's one of the things Pope Benedict wrote was about that in this passage, he was treating religion as if it were an ingrained talent. Yeah. And I thought that's weird. You always want to think religion is like a very equal opportunity thing.
That's not gospel.
That's not gospel. Yeah. Right. And it's like people are given like a sense of prophecy and other people are given a sense of interpreting prophecy. And prophecy, when you unpack it, is not about predicting the future. Prophecy is about knowledge that only God can give. Yeah. It can be about the past. It can be about the future. It can be about secret interior life stuff. It's just knowledge from God, And there's people who have that more than others. And a lot of us have that more than others. It's not supposed to be rare among Christians, and a lot of us know how to interpret it, the prophecy, and a lot of us know how to teach, right? And this is all getting kind of exciting. Yeah. So go be blessed. Yeah. All right. If you like this podcast, please send us encouragement and give us some feedback. So, all right.
Thank you, Clark.
Talk to you later, Laura Hehman.
See ya.
All right. Peace out.